The house stood at the edge of town, tall and imposing with its dark windows and twisted architecture. Most people in town avoided it, and for good reason. It was said that the house was haunted, and that anyone who entered would never leave. But there was one woman who was brave enough to take a chance. She had just gone through a difficult divorce and needed a fresh start. So she bought the house and moved in, determined to make a new life for herself. At first, everything seemed normal, but then strange things began to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, shadows would move across the walls, and the woman would hear strange whispers in her ear. The woman tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just her imagination. But the haunting became more and more intense. She would wake up in the middle of the night to find that all the furniture in her room had been moved to the other side of the room. She would hear footsteps in the hallway, but when she went to investigate, no one was there. One night, the woman was in her bedroom trying to sleep, but then she heard a scratching sound coming from outside her door. She got out of bed and opened the door, but no one was there. She closed the door and went back to bed, but the scratching sound continued. She got up again and opened the door, and this time she saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. The figure was tall and slender, with long, spindly fingers that reached out towards her. Its face was twisted into a grotesque grin, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. The woman screamed and slammed the door shut, but the figure began to scratch at the wood, trying to get in. The woman knew she had to leave, but something was holding her back. She felt like the house was alive, and that it was trying to keep her there. She went to the window and looked outside, but she saw only darkness. She turned around, and the figure was standing right behind her. It grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her close, its breath hot and foul on her face. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure whispered in her ear, promising her eternal life in the house, and the woman knew that she was doomed. The next day, the woman was found to have passed on in her bed, her body twisted and contorted into an unnatural shape. The house was abandoned once again, but the figure was still seen wandering the halls at night. Some say that the woman's spirit still lingers in the house, trapped there forever by the vengeful spirit that haunted it. In the heart of the forest, deep within the woods, stood a long abandoned house. It was once the home of a wealthy family, but now it lay in ruins, its walls creaking with the sound of every gust of wind. Many locals believed that the house was cursed and that evil spirits roamed its halls. They warned people to stay away from it, but curiosity and bravado led some to explore it. One evening, a group of friends decided to go on an adventure in the woods. They had heard stories of the haunted house and wanted to see it for themselves. They packed their bags and set out into the woods, laughing and joking along the way. As they approached the house, the sun had already set, and the only light they had was from the flashlights they had brought with them. The house was even more ominous in the dark, and the trees rustled with a strange, foreboding energy. As they stepped inside the house, they felt a chill run down their spines. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the sounds of footsteps echoed through the halls. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind them, trapping them inside. They tried to open the door, but it was stuck fast. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped in the haunted house. They could hear strange noises coming from upstairs, and the sound of whispering voices filled the air. As they made their way up the stairs, the floorboards creaked and groaned under their weight. When they reached the top, they saw a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of the room. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and it seemed to be watching them with malevolent intent. The figure began to move towards them, and they knew they had to get out of there. They ran towards the stairs, but the figure was too fast. It grabbed one of them by the ankle and dragged them back up the stairs. The others tried to pull their friend away, but they were too weak against the creature's strength. Suddenly, the figure disappeared into thin air, leaving their friend behind, unconscious and with deep scratch marks on their skin. In a desperate attempt to escape, they broke through a window and ran out of the house. They didn't stop until they were miles away, safe from the haunted house and the evil that lurked within. From that day on, they never spoke of the haunted house in the woods again. The memory of that terrifying experience was etched into their minds forever, and they knew they had been lucky to escape with their lives. It was a dark and stormy night when the Wilson family arrived at their new home. They had just moved to the countryside, looking for a quieter life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. As they pulled up to the driveway of the large Victorian-style house, they couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. As they stepped out of the car, the rain was coming down in sheets, drenching them within seconds. The only thing they could hear was the sound of the rain hitting the roof of the car and the occasional crack of thunder in the distance. They made their way to the front door, fumbling with their keys to unlock it. Finally, the door creaked open, and they stepped inside. The first thing they noticed was the musty smell that hung in the air, and the feeling of coldness that seemed to permeate the house. As they made their way through the hallway, the floorboards creaked under their feet, and they could hear the sound of their own breathing echoing off the walls. They tried to shake off the feeling of unease that was settling in, but it only seemed to intensify the deeper they ventured into the house. The living room was the first room they came across, and it was completely empty except for a single armchair in the center of the room. It looked old and worn, with the fabric torn and the stuffing coming out of the armrests. The family made their way into the kitchen, hoping to find some comfort in the familiarity of cooking a meal. But as soon as they entered, they realized that there was something off about the room. The utensils were old and rusty, and the pots and pans were covered in a thick layer of dust. As they made their way up the stairs, they could feel the air getting colder, and the hairs on the back of their necks standing on end. The hallway was long and dark, with only the occasional flicker of lightning illuminating the way. The bedrooms were just as eerie as the rest of the house. The furniture was old and dusty, and the mattresses were stained and torn. The family tried to push past the feeling of unease and get settled in for the night, but it was difficult to ignore the unsettling atmosphere of the house. As they lay in their beds, they could hear strange noises coming from the walls and the floors. It sounded like whispers and scratching, but they couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. They tried to reassure themselves that it was just the wind outside or the house settling, but they couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else in the house with them. As the night wore on, the Wilson family found themselves being plagued by vivid nightmares. They dreamed of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the room and of ghostly apparitions staring at them from the foot of the bed. They woke up several times throughout the night, gasping for air and drenched in sweat. Finally, morning came, and the Wilson family decided that they had had enough. They packed up their belongings and left the haunted house behind, never looking back. Years later, the house still stands in the middle of the countryside, its windows boarded up and its doors locked. No one has dared to venture inside since the Wilson family left, and the locals whisper stories of strange happenings and ghostly sightings that continue to plague the house to this day. Thanks for watching today's video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps us out, and until next time, stay safe and never wander too far from the light.